All-time record high numbers of young adults living home with their parents. Once and for all, let's just stop pretending, please, that this pitiful and clueless demographic of young people is unquestionably correct in their political choices and their moral decisions are so wise compared to the rest of us. Can we stop that? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness, full-bore craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Before we get to our first story, I want to mention our brand new Patriot Club. Look, we are a club. We are patriotic. We're not ashamed of it. And as most of you know, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and the rest of Silicon Valley and their radical progressive politics are not big fans of our show. So to fight back, we have launched our own brand new Patriot Club for a one-time, once-a-year, $99 tax-deductible donation. You can help keep our show going. You can keep standing up to the man. And as a token of our appreciation, we'll ship you this stainless steel beauty here, this Freedom Never Tasted So Good tumbler. I've actually drank from this, and I can guarantee you there are no leaks, and everything you pour into it tastes a lot better. So all you have to do is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. We greatly appreciate your support, and with your help, we'll be keep sticking it to the man. All right, coming up, we have international correspondent Alex Newman in studio today to discuss a new study that finds a record number of adults are now back at home with their parents thanks to COVID. But first, we turn it over to Katie to take a look at the health of our republic.
The Democratic Party and their defunct presidential nominee Joe Biden really think you're stupid. That's it. And I have all the examples to show how this radical approach with riots and violence is absolutely nothing new. Are you stupid? If you've looked around and seen the insanity that is happening in major cities across the country and you think it's actual insanity, then you probably have a working frontal cortex. But between the Democratic politicians and the media, they are trying to convince you that you are the idiot for wanting the riots, looting, and violence to stop. Example A.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Over the course of the daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful demonstrations in the face of law enforcement. It wasn't.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do you disavow the violence from Antifa? That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online.
We take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in the Congress of the United States.
At least they're at their jobs, which reminds me, it's time for my non-union break to drink from this sweet vessel of freedom. But more on that later. Back to how Nancy is all busy getting her hairs did up all nice, while some people look like Sasquatch because their hair salons aren't allowed to actually operate in her dumpster city of San Francisco. But for Nancy, who gives a damn about rules? All for me, ice cream included, and none for thee. And Nancy, when you get caught red commie-handed, your chompers actually claim to be the victim.
So I take responsibility for falling for a setup. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
Old Biddy needs to go home, like to Sunnyside Acres or Oak Ridge Gardens type home. Meanwhile, here's what's actually happening in our streets, like the ones represented by the likes of the Nancy Pelosi's of the world.
Just threw something on fire, Chris, a firecracker. Yep. Something's on fire!
What an elderly woman has to do with anything and why she needed the bird flipped at her is beyond me. But since she was coming from the White House, most clearly she is the spawn of Satan. All of this type of behavior, and much worse, has been going on for literally months now in these Democrat-led cities. So naturally, they blame it all on the big orange man who is so bad that he is the baddest of the bad. It's all his fault that this is happening. But when he wants to actually come to assess what's happening and meet with civic leaders, they instead say,
"How dare you?
I am concerned your presence will only hinder our healing.
How dare you?"
Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul, who is a Democrat and who is leading the state investigation into the Jacob Blake shooting, also tweeted the president should hold off.
When President Trump is gone, and newsflash, it will happen one day or another, then who are they all going to blame? Will they even remember who they blamed prior to Trump? Like back in the day when they loved and adored the Donald? Again, they think you are stupid. But it's nothing new. None of it is new. And I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about in the video I am releasing after this one. Check it out for a history lesson and a wake-up call about how we saw all of this 50 years ago. But back here in the degeneration that is 2020, our radicals are the Black Lives Matter organization, and they are blunt in about everything they do, including saying exactly what they want to do and will do, and what they are working to do.
I want to take the fight to them. And at the end of the day, if they ain't gonna hear us, we burn them the down. I'm one that talk real shit. I talk it in New York, and I talk it in D.C. The same way I police up in New York, I cops up here in D.C. The same way I bust police in the head in New York, I bust police in the head in D.C.
That this is being said, that this is being cheered on, that our representatives are allowing and encouraging it, that our media is making excuses for it. That's what should surprise and scare you. Instead of action to stop it, we have to hear from the likes of Democrat Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler. He too hates the president and would rather, and has allowed, for the burning of the city he swore an oath to protect. And then he actually had the balls to say the violence is Trump's fault.
Do you seriously wonder, Mr. President, why this is the first time in decades that America has seen this level of violence?
Fact check. False. Check out my next video to see all about how the radicals would rather things blow up. I'd say it'll be a barn burner, but too many things have burned at this point.
It's you who have created the hate and the division.
Who created Black Lives Matter? Who created Antifa? If Trump created them, then he's in charge of them. Let's logic this one. You all call Trump a fascist. If Trump is a fascist, and he created all of this, then he created Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Ergo, a fascist created the anti-fascist group. Is that correct? I'm confused, Teddy. Help me out.
You've tried to divide us more than any other figure in modern history. And now you want me to stop the violence that you helped create.
For more than 3 months, Wheeler has let his city burn. Every day he has the choice to decide if he will let the cops put an end to the violence. And every day he chooses to let it continue. But now, it's hit a lot closer to home.
Now, this riot coincided with Mayor Wheeler's birthday, and people in the crowd taunted him, bringing balloons and wearing party hats as they called for him to resign.
Well, he is resigning, but it's from his condo building where the rioters marched and lit off the fireworks. Again, let's use some logic because I want to get this straight. Everyone in Portland is a peaceful protester, and it's Trump's fault. But Ted Wheeler has to move out of his $800,000 condo because of the protesting. And he can afford to just move when there are any problems. Everyone else, tough luck. Do you see yet how they really do think you're stupid? I will say, this is Portland, so it's a fire dump of leftist mentality and man buns. I mean, they do want to keep Portland weird, after all. And they really are weird. But there are good and decent people out there who just don't want to see their city burn. And some have lost their lives for it, including Aaron J. Danielson, who was killed by a man who said he is 100% Antifa after he attended a car rally supporting the president. Jay's friends are disgusted by the lies spread by the media.
And it's time that this city hears who he was, because he was a good man that would have helped anyone in any need at any time. And to hear his name being mentioned the way it is absolutely tragic.
A man's life was taken during these protests. He's not the first, and sadly, he won't be the last. We've had innocent children killed during this chaos, and that outrage fades to nothing because it's not the correct narrative. And as I've said a few times already, this is nothing new. It's happened time and time again in cities run by politicians and reported on by media who think that you are stupid and that you will just keep believing them. The choice is yours. Until next time, stay healthy, America.
Back now with Alex Newman, our international correspondent, and we're lucky to have Alex Newman in the studio with us today. Alex, thanks for being here.
I'm the lucky one. Thanks for having me, dude.
That's right. You are lucky. We're both lucky. And we both got our FreedomProject tumblers. There you go.
Awesome.
And Mike will cue the music, I'm sure. So, Alex Newman, we have a really important story here because there's just so many ways to take this. A new study demonstrates that a majority of young adults in the United States live with their parents for the first time since the Great Depression. More kids are living with mom and dad longer. Yeah, go all the way back to the Great Depression. See numbers like this. And when you think about the wealth and the opportunity, the cushy way these kids have been brought up, these aren't Dust Bowl kids, right? These are kids who have had everything they've wanted all their lives, but they can't seem to leave the home. What's going on, Alex?
We're raising up perpetual children. And we have numbers now that have never been seen before in this country. And for me, we were talking before the show, it's just inconceivable. On the day of my 18th birthday, I was trying to get as far from my parents and I love my parents. I have a great relationship with them. But hey, I'm free. I'm 18.
And where did you go?
I went to South Africa.
You hopped on a plane and went to South Africa.
I flew to Cape Town, and it was a long way away, and I loved it. It was great. And I told my kids, 18, you're out of here. So I just can't fathom what would go through the mind of a young person to say, you know what, I think I'll move back in. I'll move in with 3 roommates before I do that.
It doesn't surprise me. We've intellectually and emotionally hamstrung these kids. We tell them from the time they're children that when it comes to sex and pleasure, they're adults, right? They can sleep with whoever they want to sleep with, and if they're not, by the time they're 10, there's something wrong with them. But then when it comes to every other aspect of their life, we treat them like babies, right? Obamacare extended the childhood period through the 27th year. Now they want free college and free community college to go along with mandatory free public school. So they want the kids now, they want to get them at pre-K, mandatory pre-K, keep them in school all the way through their college degree, which is going to put them at 22, 23, 24 years old. Every aspect of our culture, they want to lower the ability of them to vote from 18 to 16, right? But they want to push back gun ownership into the late 20s. So you can see what's happening. When it comes to living their lives as responsible, liberty-driven kids who live in a constitution republic, we want to hamstring them. When it comes to the social welfare net and the greedy, materialistic, pleasure-living cycle of life, then we empower them with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suspect it's by design, Duke. Children and children in adult bodies are much easier to manipulate and steal freedom from than competent, responsible, self-sustaining, independent adults. And I think that's part of the agenda. You know, we see it as early as elementary school. They're grooming these children to be perpetual children. No sense of responsibility. Everybody gets a trophy just for participating. It's not that the people doing this are stupid. In fact, they're incredibly smart. This is deliberate.
Yeah, take a look at that chart. We're at the point where now 51, a majority of American kids are living with their parents now, right? At least that through April of the year. And it's gone up from 50, started back in January with 46% of the kids, all the way through now with 52% of through July at least, kids living with their parents, more than half. And the thing that gets me about this too is on the one hand, when you look at these kids' inability, I mean, we have to have crying rooms on campus libraries during finals, coloring book puppy therapy. Every time, heaven help you if Donald Trump wins the presidency again. Because the last time he ran, all the universities offered psychological counseling to their kids because Trump won a legitimate election, literally. And so, on the other hand, despite all of this childishness, this is also an incredibly bullying, angry group. These are the kids who are burning things down. This is the demographic that's in the streets, screaming, young white kids screaming in the faces of black police officers, the N-word, arson, looting, shooting, targeting people and killing them, as happened on the West Coast, right? One of the conservative protesters was hunted and murdered by a kid this age. And what you're seeing here is, boy, are they fragile. On the one hand, they're all about, help me, I'm so pathetic, and I need all the handouts. But they'll lecture you about how stupid and foolish you are. In a heartbeat.
We saw that so clearly after that shooting in Florida. We saw David Hogg, I think was his name, and his sidekick, what was it, Emma Riley, running around talking about. I heard the kid on CNN. He said, "Wait till our parents' generation is gone. They don't know how to run an effing democracy. We're just going to disarm everybody, and everything's going to work so well." And yet they think like children. Adults, at least in the past, thought logically and reasonably, and they didn't let their emotions govern their thinking. And yet now the kids, they'll start crying. You try to use a logical argument or you try to use facts and reason, and you get this emotional, conditioned response that's been literally conditioned into them like circus animals. They're incapable of rational thought.
Yeah, I want to follow up on this after the break right here about the emotional childishness, but the levels of anger and violence are really high. Tantrum throwing. We'll see you right after the break. Back with Alex Newman, talking about this shocking statistic. 52%, the largest percentage since the Great Depression of young people are living with their parents. To me, the epitome, the example that explains this is that one captain of Antifa, remember? Little ginger guy. He was a typical young adult living with his parents. But he was a captain, right? He was an organizer of Antifa. He was one of the thugs. And when he was finally arrested, he curled up in a fetal ball on the ground when the police and started sobbing. Right? On the one hand, this guy's throwing Molotov cocktails and threatening to cut the throats of anybody who likes democracy and freedom. And the minute he gets collared by the cops, he's whinging like a little child. This sums it up in a nutshell.
It is, and it's become so typical. And it's not that every young person acts that way and feels that way, but if you just look at the polling data, it's very clear what's happening here. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation released a poll last year. They found that 70% of my generation of millennials describe themselves as socialists and say they're going to vote for socialist candidates in the future. Well over a third of them view communism favorably. They've brainwashed them into either disbelieving in God or hating God, to the point now where millennials are the first non-Christian majority generation in American history. And this is all very clearly moving us in one direction, and that is the direction of losing our country, losing our freedoms, and losing everything that made America great to begin with. Imagine these overgrown babies trying to run our political institutions that were designed for, free-thinking, clear-thinking, rational people. It's just inconceivable. It's not going to happen.
Hard work. Let's not forget the old Protestant work ethic that you can mock all you want, but it takes a lot of work to not just build, but to sustain civilization. Yeah. And this is not work, right? You think about these numbers of kids staying home and what that means politically. Of course they're socialists because they've been taught to believe that everybody owes them something, that they're victims, right? That these young kids who never missed a meal, who never spent a night out on the street, who don't know what real suffering is like or hardship is like, they believe they're owed everything. That when you get to that axis, when you cross that axis of arrogance and ignorance, when those two things intersect at that perfect storm point, you get revolutionaries who whine at little things. They're incapable of operating a day-to-day existence, but they lay around the house and they're more and more entitled. And again, like you said, it's not every kid like this. But what's the answer to this? Because the schools, obviously the parents have indulged these kids to some degree. Like you said, your dad, you couldn't wait to get out of the house, and you told your own kids, be ready at 18. Many would consider you a monster for that. How does your wife think about that?
She agrees. The kids need to have a sense of responsibility. They cannot grow up thinking that they're just going to mooch off mom and dad. I don't make enough money for my kids to mooch off me. When they're 18, they've got to find a way. And honestly, that's part of growing up. They need to go out. They need to find a job. They need to get ready to find a husband or a wife. They cannot stay at home and be perpetual babies. It's bad for them. It's bad for society. It's bad for the family. It can't happen. And I have a certain degree of sympathy for some of these young people. You know, the economy right now is in some really serious problems. The COVID-19 was used as a pretext by governors to shut down small businesses, and 50 million jobs went up in smoke. So I have some sympathy, but the attitude that goes along with it is what I think is really disturbing. If we were in Great Depression era, people are worried about where they're going to get their next meal, it'd be one thing. But these kids, they feel entitled. They don't see anything wrong with mooching off their parents. In fact, they feel like they're owed a living from their parents, from the taxpayer, whatever. And then all they want to do in exchange is burn down civilization, burn down buildings, tell us all how we have privilege and we're entitled. I mean, it's a recipe for suicide for a civilization, and that's what we're heading toward.
Well, and let's be clear: the public schools and the universities have not only not helped them, they've jettisoned responsibility and critical thinking. To ask these kids to be responsible, unless you're white, then you bear the burden of white guilt. On top of everything else, you burden the kid with white guilt, right? That everything is wrong is partially you. But we have not grown them up. We're not holding them accountable for grades. We're not demanding that they become literate and math facile. We've just social promotion, right? A Common Core where we teach to the lowest common denominator. What they're learning in the public schools and their universities runs absolutely counter to bringing forth legitimately stable young individuals who can look after themselves and others. So the parents may have a role to play in those, but don't discount what's going on with the schools.
Yeah, and I mean, all they're being taught is to destroy, not to create, not to build. They're being taught to destroy. And I mean, think about what happens to a nation when the young people are being taught these types of things. It is disaster waiting to happen.
Antifa, that's what you get.
That's right.
Antifa kids who, when they're done looting and pillaging, go home and live in their parents' basement. That's what you end up with.
Thank you, Alex, for keeping my seat warm. But now I'm back, and it's time for some real education. In 1500, the German Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer painted his portrait just before his 29th birthday. It was to be the last of 3 self-portraits. Art historians consider it to be one of the most personal, iconic, and complex self-portraits in all of Renaissance painting. The self-portrait is most remarkable because of its resemblance to many earlier representations of Christ. Art historians note the similarities with the conventions of religious painting, including its symmetry, dark tones, and the manner in which the artist directly confronts the viewer and raises his hands to the middle of his chest as if in the act of blessing.
Yeah, this is one of the most striking paintings of Renaissance culture and actually world art. Up until this point, there had never been a portrait, a self-portrait, painted this way. And I think in many ways, what Dürer did here was going to bring self-portraiture from artists much more in vogue than it ever had been. Throughout the Middle Ages, you had situations where some of the great painters, Giotto, Masaccio, they would paint themselves into their own pictures, but usually as a very small spectator in the back, peering around a window or looking around a doorway. But this is full-blown, for lack of a better word, artistic narcissism. Take a look at the picture. It really is an arresting image. I mean, there's something almost a cult about this. You look at you get this great look at the artist Dürer at the height of his powers. He is broad-shouldered. He is clearly a physical specimen. And you look at that hair. They didn't have curling irons back. Well, they kind of did, but I'm pretty sure Albrecht Dürer didn't need them. But most arresting about this painting is 2 things. It's the look on his face, the way his eyes bore into your consciousness. This effect is created in part by the genius approach of having no background. There's nothing behind him. It's as if he floats in space, which gives him an almost transcendental image, or a symbolically transcendental self of presence. Those who have said that this picture reminds them of a whole class of paintings and representations of Jesus Christ, I think that's right. You got that kind of ethereal gravity. If you look at it again, look at those fingers. Those are the fingers of an artist, right? They're long, they're dexterous, they are powerful. But you think about what they're doing there. I mean, it's almost as if he's turned Christ's blessing toward himself. The raised fingers of the Christ in blessing of the people out there, outside the frame of many of those pictures, seems to be placed back on himself. There is a remarkable assertion of the presence of the artist. You think about what would happen in a couple hundred years. This is still the age and the era where artists were craftsmen. They were part of guilds. They weren't necessarily considered part of the intellectual elite. They were not necessarily college-educated people. They were craftsmen and tradesmen. They were seen as. But one last look at that picture. What he's telling you is, I am no craftsman. I am the artist. In a couple hundred years, you would get that image of the highly sexualized, virile artist living in his garret in poverty, a very dangerous figure. This may be the first image in Western culture of what would happen a couple centuries later. And before we go, take a quick look at this picture. We did this picture a couple months ago on the Dr. Duke Show, and all of our instant classic art pieces, our segments, are archived on our FreedomProject.com site, so you can see all of them. This is Salvator Mundi, allegedly by Leonardo da Vinci, but we can't be quite sure of that. And if you think about the parallels between this picture, look at that, look at the fingers, look at the hair, look at the gaze of the Christ, which in this case is serenely probing. Go back to the picture once before, and you can see this. It's interesting to speculate. Maybe it wasn't, maybe that picture, you go back to Salvator Mundi, maybe it wasn't Da Vinci, and maybe it happened a little bit later than we think, and maybe, just maybe, could Duray have had something to do with it? No way of answering that here and now, but an interesting question nonetheless.
All right, just as a reminder, these premier beverage vessels of freedom are now available when you join our Patriot Club with a one-time $99 tax-deductible donation. Visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. Your gift truly does keep this show going, so thank you in advance. Now let's wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. Vincent van Gogh is considered to be the most famous self-portrait painter. In just a 3-year span, some say the numbers are a little tweaked. Some say he painted himself 37 times, which, if it is actually 37 times, it's fascinating because he committed suicide at age 37.
And I would simply say that, for my money, I'll take, as much as I love Van Gogh, no more introspective painter of himself than Rembrandt, who I think painted himself more than that, or coming close to that at least. But the very penetrating, watching Rembrandt age over time is a staggering achievement. And that's going to do it for the show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.